Well, it's good to see you, man.
It's great to see you too.
I mean, we've been here together for the last 2 days or one day, I guess, at this
we
point.
we packed a lot of stuff in 24-hour period. Actually,
We
less
did.
than 24-hour
We
period.
did. But
Yeah.
when we just got done with the shooting the course,
Yeah.
which is your adaptive athlete course, if I
Right.
understand correctly.
Yeah.
So tell us what that is.
Uh, so a few years ago, I was fortunate enough, I think, to get turned on to archery.
Mhm.
And I started shooting trad bow or traditional bow initially.
Oh, that's what you did first
Yeah.
as you got into archery?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I picked up a Hoyt Buffalo just randomly at some archery shop because I was looking at compound bows and I was like,
Mhm.
I don't even know
Oh,
what the hell is going on here.
right.
Like there's so many strings and buttons and lights and shit. And I
And then
was
it's got
like,
to be customized to you and
yeah.
draw length and all that stuff.
So that intimidated me to the point where I was like, I just got to get this like stick with a string. I think I can figure that out.
Yeah.
And so I started shooting, and one of my buddies, Baker Levitt, he's friends. Well, he's an associate with John Dudley.
Mm.
And then John turned me on to. He's like, you should get something that you can actually hit your target with.
That might keep you in the game a little longer.
Yeah. It might provoke your interest a little
Right,
bit more.
Right. Unless you're like Aaron Snyder.
Correct. Yeah, unless you're really trying to like take your shoes off and
Mhm.
do hardcore stock
Right.
aim. And that's a next level type of situation.
Mhm.
That's Aaron's game. But to answer your question, with compound bows and with shooting the last few years, I've done a ton of pistol and rifle shooting, but the archery world was completely new to me,
Mhm.
and it really helped me in a wide variety of ways because it's an active form of meditation. It's quiet.
Yeah.
I can hit a target.
You got to focus on that thing alone. I guess that's the meditative portion
Yeah,
of it.
I think so. I think it's somewhat meditative, and you get to use a projectile and hit a target with it. So it's familiar enough because you're working through the fundamentals of shooting. I realized I was like, man, I think there's a lot of good we can do within the veteran community in archery, not just because I like it, just because it helped me and the other guys that I know. I started talking to other vets, and they're like, yeah, it did the same thing for me. Did the same thing for me. And John and I started talking. I was like, man, we got to do something for veterans. And then there's a unique group of veterans that have been wounded in combat
Right.
that I think they need. Not as if every veteran needs help, because that's not the situation, but a lot of the adaptive guys that have been wounded in combat, they miss out on some things because it's fairly intimidating. Like I was intimidated to get a compound bow and start learning and get a coach and all this other
Being
shit.
around other people that have been doing it for 2 decades.
Yeah,
for sure.
So we did an adaptive athlete shoot last year with
Was that
Total
the
Archery
first one
Challenge.
you did last year?
Yeah, it was the first one.
I was supposed to go out there, but I couldn't make it. But yeah, it looked amazing.
Man, it was so much fun.
Mhm.
And the veteran community, especially the wounded veteran community, they're obviously there's a fairly large or substantial group, like thousands of people that have lost limbs and eyesight from Afghanistan or Iraq, or traffic accidents or something like that in the last 20 years. So being able to give that back and say, hey, this is something I think is pretty cool. Maybe this will help you guys. At the end of the day, I teamed up with PSE and a bunch of these other companies. They donated bows. We had all these cool partners. Everybody came together. We did coaching sessions, took them out on the course, did a 3D
So these guys,
course.
when they go out, like they haven't ever shot before?
Most of them, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that part of it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
A lot of guys hadn't shot a bow.
So is Dudley giving them instruction? Other guys are giving them instruction on how to...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we brought in some adaptive athlete coaches,
Mhm.
Dudley, a bunch of other guys like Cole Kramer. He
Oh,
came
yeah.
down from Alaska. So all these guys were in town for Total Archery Challenge, and it fit really well into the schedule. So we could do a couple days of coaching before we went out.
Right.
And then this year, I asked Sean from Total Archery Challenge to come out and build a course out here, so we could run adaptive athlete shoots, every month if we wanted
Whenever
to.
you wanted to. Yeah.
There's a ton of vets here in San Antonio area too that they just want to get out, especially with COVID restrictions, most of their BS.
Just get active.
Get active. And
it's amazing to see these guys too, because I did a Spartan, a Gogi. It's a 60-hour endurance event, and I did this like 3 years ago, roughly.
Really?
Yeah, and I remember in my head, I must have been 30 or 40 hours into this thing.
Right.
And I was bitching and moaning in my head, no, this is stupid, and I'm, my legs hurt or whatever. And I saw one of these adaptive athletes walk past me, and I was like, oh man, like here's this guy who's missing both of his limbs. He's got prosthetics, of course. And he's got, I think if I remember right, he had like the canes that attached to his arm, and he was just hiking and had a little hop in his step. And I'm like, what the hell am I complaining about? Like when you see these people and what they do, and then their attitudes about it and how supportive they are of their own community and other people, it really puts things in perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things I last year when I one of my good buddies, Clint Trial, he lives here. One of the things I was talking to him about specifically, I was like, we have to inspire leadership from the veteran community. We have to, put people out that are, obviously, I think psychology is more infectious than COVID. And I think from just what you said, which is, these guys get up and they suck it up every day, and they're living with permanent injury.
Right.
And there's a lot of guys that create excuses to not do something. When you see guys that are not creating excuses, they're living a positive life, they're trying to make positive impact and surround themselves with positive people. Mm-hmm. That stuff translates and it becomes viral. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of my goals was, and coming back to two things that truly I utilize in my life, which is one, archery, which I love, and then two, the people that inspire, motivate me, and push me to try to do at least good for the community, good for the company, keep me kind of focused, center mass on azimuth, is the guys that haven't come back from these wars.
Yeah. And
the guys that are living with permanent physical and psychological injuries. I'm lucky, right? I know it. I've got my fingers, my toes, my kids are healthy, my wife's healthy, everybody's good to go.
Right.
But there are a lot of guys that, they got to roll out of bed into their chair, or their legs aren't fitting right,
or it rubs the skin wrong and tears them, and yeah. And a lot of these guys are the most positive people that I know. Like you call them and they're supercharged. They're like, "What the fuck is up, man? What's going on?" And for me, if I can try to at least add some value to that group of people, those people in any way, shape, or form, I don't care what it is, but just connect in and pay for some positivity. And when I say that, it's, get everybody together, buy the bows, get the 3D targets, arrange the schedule, work the logistics, get everybody there. That's super easy. And it's one of the most fulfilling things that I've been able to do in the last several years of the company. You bring people in and, everybody's eating together and laughing and sharing having a
stories.
Good time,
yeah.
Teasing each other.
Yeah. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
So,
well, and you said something interesting yesterday. I think it was yesterday. We've done a lot, like you said, but you said something like some struggles or something in the business. And then you said, but that's not real. Like those aren't real problems.
No.
My wife's at home. She's happy and healthy. My kids are healthy and they're learning and growing and they're intelligent. And like all of that stuff's dialed in and in check. And it seems like we complain about trivial bullshit that doesn't actually matter. We get so consumed with our own problems, and they're not even problems.
No.
Like most of what we deal with is not a problem, but we blow it up. I don't know if we blow it up because it gives us some sort of like purpose or excuse, maybe even, for not performing the way that we should. And then you start seeing these other people who are excelling in spite of certainly difficult circumstances. And it just blows up your excuse for not doing it yourself.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think about that a lot because of social media more than anything, right? It's a fictional reality. Mm-hmm. It's not real. The comments, you don't know the people necessarily.
Or they might not even be people.
Right, they're not people.
Like bots.
Or they're bots.
Yeah.
Or some 16-year-old from Honduras. Like, who gives a shit?
Right.
But the tangible aspects of life for me at least, and I have to remind myself, because that's just white noise. And at the end of the day, you have to chop that shit out and then focus on the things that are real. Like, I know when I step into the company in the morning and I, high five my employees and talk about what we're going to do, today, this week, this month, when we're handing out bonuses, or you're doing a new roast, or connecting in with the team, that's real. That's tangible.
Right.
You can't take it with you, which is fine. You can't take shit with you other than obviously your legacy
what you experienced, what you learned. Sure. Yeah.
But I have to constantly chop out the white noise, focus on what's real. They're not real problems, right? And for whatever reason, your brain wants to activate some of that crap and then focus on, because it's easy to focus on negative. It's really hard to push yourself into the positive and maintain the positive. Like, I have to be a positive influence on my family. Like, there is no deviation from that. Like, there is no left or right. I can't be the guy that's on my phone every night. I can't be the guy that comes home and is an asshole to my kids and my wife because I got some stress going on at work.
Right, yeah, for
and
sure.
It's not stress. Like, nobody's shooting RPGs at me. Nobody's rattling off a PKM or
you said you
AK.
had an RPG that went through the grill of your Humvee, that or truck
car,
or whatever it was, and didn't explode. Fortunately, obviously,
very fortunate.
That's
a real
intense.
problem,
right? That's pretty intense. Versus somebody who says, "I don't like Black Rifle." Oh, okay,
yeah,
all right. So
and at the end of the day, I don't know that guy or whomever, right? I don't know those people, and they're probably not going to be a customer either way.
Well, you don't know their motive either.
No.
Like so we're friends. So if I came to you and I said, "Hey, Evan, I see something," and I thought I would just point it out, like, that comes with more weight because you know that I care about you and what you want to accomplish.
Right.
But if I came to you and I was just some random dude off the street, and I'm like, "Hey, here's a problem." It's like, who the hell are you? Like, what? Like, you don't have my best interest at heart, or maybe you do, but I don't know that.
Well, nobody, like you said, when you identify those real friends or those people in your life that will give you candid feedback as to what you're doing.
Yeah.
I always have the legacy of mentors and men that have been a positive influence in my life, that were positive leaders, that were good leaders, that were good managers, good men, whether that was my, grandfather or my great-grandfather or the guys that I served with. It's the people that are looking over my shoulder that are going, would they be okay with this? And
like, do you think about that when you're making decisions? Do you think what would my grandfather think, or how would he handle this situation?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I think just because somebody is dead, people think they can't be an influence in your life.
Right.
And that's just not true. I mean, for years after my grandmother died, when I was in my, like 9, 10, or 11 years old, I thought for sure she was looking down at me and prevented me from masturbating all those years, Like, I was like, I'm not going to do this.
Grandma's watching. That would do it. That would definitely do it.
But no, I think one of the things that we do is we put a finite cap on people's influence in our lives. And I think you have to, and not to get too existential in some way, but those people would have, especially the people I served with, they would have died for naught if they would not have pushed me to be a better man today.
Right. Yeah, true.
And they're there. They're there every day. And I've said it before on multiple podcasts, but Iraq is with me. It's with me every day of my life. It's never going away. And, the 4.5 years that I have in that country, that was very, very formative in my years, especially my 20s and 30s.
Yeah, when you're young, yeah.
And I can live and dwell on the negative of how that country impacted my life, or I can take that experience and I can put it through basically a processor and then use that to get me up in the morning and kick me in the ass and say, if I don't create positivity, something positive, if I don't create, jobs or, a high quality product, which is typically, it is at the forefront, but it's just kind of an implied thing. It's like, what do we do to create a positive impact, positive ecosystem. If I don't do that, the interface and the connection that I had with those men, it dies with them.
Right.
So they have to live, and ultimately they're living through me, and every day they're living through me.
That's a good point. It seems like to me, and I've had these experiences too, where it's like you do them a disservice if you don't show up the way that, occasionally I'll have a young man ask, he'll have his father die, for example. It's a young man, and he'll say, how do I go on? My dad's dead and we were super close and I don't know what to do. And I don't want to dismiss the pain that, of course, an emotional trauma that comes with that. But at the same time, the answer is live the life that he would have been proud of you for living. That's the path. That is the path forward. Make him proud of you.
Right.
And I think a lot of guys get hung up in thinking that, like you said, death is just finite. It's the end point and what's done is done. No, like you can use that for fuel. But the question is, what separates you, somebody who takes those experiences, which are painful and difficult circumstances where you've lost brothers, and turn it into a positive, run it through that process, like you said, or somebody who decides to self-implode because of it? Because we both know people who are like that.
Yeah, I honestly think that a lot of it has to do with, one, what type of an experience was it, right? So, trauma is different to every individual.
Right. It's subjective.
Yes.
Sure.
And then substance abuse is typically a coping mechanism. And I think substance abuse on top of trauma, it really starts to create a hostile environment for the individual, right? The person that's living in that.
Yeah.
And then those are compounding elements. So I have to be really straight with myself, right? And which sounds kind of trite when you think about it, but it's the truth. I have to have really, really hard conversations with myself. I don't drink. Typically, when I say that, like I haven't had a drink in like a year, except for maybe one glass of wine with Andy Stumpf, because I know that based on the stress in my life and my past, that could be a weakness that could compound itself into something that is ultimately a dead end.
So those are boundaries that you put in place. You said, look, if I go down this path, I don't know where that path leads, and I know I'm not interested in going down that path.
Exactly. It's actually it works very much like that with negativity too. So you start buying into negativity in your life, and if you make that acceptable behavior, it becomes a normal, right? The new normal is kind of a buzzword. So, I can be an asshole, but typically that's because I'm a coach, right? I'm a coach. Like I have to sit here and fucking put people on the field and tell them what they're doing wrong and be super candid and drive the train. And that doesn't come off in flowery prose sometimes. That's like, get up, get your ass to work. I don't care what your problems are. Like, suck it up. Let's go.
How do you check that, though? Because, some people are – we were talking about it actually earlier this morning, like the way that you talk with some people versus others, military service versus somebody who doesn't. So, like, how do you check that maybe natural tendency or even something that you learned through your military service to – that's how we talk to each other?
Right.
And so you get with another veteran – it's no problem.
It's no problem.
You get with somebody else who's never had a grown man in their face or never heard any sort of dark humor or anything like that, and they're like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? So how do you check that attitude, if needs be?
You got to take the temperature, I think, and you got to build people into it. I really do think you have to build people into it. You can't just come at typically, right? You can't just come at people that haven't had the same life experiences and maybe they haven't been in the military, whatever it might be. You can't come at them in a way that's going to be so foreign that it's going to put them on their heels.
But I think a lot of people do that. It's funny. I hear a lot these days of like, and you've heard it too, like the 0Fs mentality, like this is just the way I am. If they can't deal with it, then that's their problem, not mine. I'm like, how are you going to lead somebody with that attitude?
That's not real. That's not a real thing.
Right.
That's for people that have no ability to grow individually or evolve, right? That's like, fuck the world, I'm great.
Right. Very ego-driven.
Sure. I don't think that leads people down a successful path whatsoever. None of the people that I truly respect can't modify their communication, or at least modify their behavior, so they can get the team to a place where it needs to be.
Right.
I think when you're running a business, or if you're the head of the household or whatever that might be,
mm-hmm.
it's a team sport.
Right.
You got to show up and you got to put in the work, right? Like that's part of the thing, is showing up, being present, putting in the work. For me, a lot of it is focused on positivity and positive psychology and positive reinforcement, but it's also coupled with, you have to create boundaries and you have to enforce them as well. And you have different forms of communication with different people that you can apply. A good example I've used in the past is, kind of falling back on combat experience, where I can convey a point when we're not in a gunfight to somebody and say, hey, I need you to go over there and stand at that window,
mm-hmm.
and somebody will do it.
Right.
Somebody's shooting at you and they're locked up and they're frozen. You might have to grab them by the back of the uniform and apply them into that situation physically.
Yeah, sure.
That is a totally different form of communication. Nonetheless, it's the same, but it's applied in different circumstances.
You're producing the same outcome, the same
right.
result. I need you to be there doing this thing.
I need you to be there. And sometimes you have to use several different modes of communication. There are times when I'll say things, and Jared's probably heard this a million times too. I'll say things the same thing 3 different ways, 3 different times. Because in order to convey a point, you have to think about it. You might have to put it out in the written format. You might have to put it out in the physical space format. Right. You might have to put it out in multiple different ways.
Come at it from different angles.
Yeah. And then once you've exhausted all of those and you still can't get through, you have to ask yourself, is it me?
Mm-hmm.
You do still have to ask that question. Am I the problem with this communication? And that is not a zero fucks type mentality. That's,
right.
That's like, holy
shit. You're caring about how you show up.
You got to show up. And
I heard one of my friends, he's been on the podcast. His name is Brett Bartholomew. He says something, I don't want to butcher it. He says, you can get compliance that way, but you can't get commitment.
Right.
And what we want, whether you're a father or a business owner or a leader at your, church congregation, is you don't want compliance.
No.
I mean, in some cases, if you're in the firefight, I just need you to comply and do this right now. But also that soldier who you grab by the back of the neck and put in that thing, there's also a level of trust there because you've trained together. He understands you, you've gotten to know him. And so you have that commitment, which is significantly deeper than just some level of compliance from people.
Yeah, and it's a difference between a dictator and a leader, right? There's a big difference between those two things. And if that's your style, which I know a lot of guys that run businesses and that's their style, right? They're dictators.
Right. Yeah.
And I know a lot of guys that run their families like that. Typically, they're not my friends, but I know guys that kind of run their families like that as well. And that's a big difference between a guy that is connecting emotionally with his family, his community, his business, whatever that might be, applying empathy in different modes of communication in order to truly lead. And leadership looks different to a wide variety of people. I mean, you're going to get through to different people different ways. Like Dave over there, I yell at him all the time, but that's the way we communicate. He's told me he appreciates it, and he appreciates that form of communication. And I've tried to fire him at least 20 times.
He's nodding his head. He's like,
yeah, he likes it.
I was just making sure.
Yeah. But there's a lot of guys out there, I mean, in the company that are mill guys, and you got to light them up.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you just got to light them up, and it's like that. Oh shit! I'm awake now. I'm listening.
Right.
Okay. And then there are people that they just don't need that. They don't need that type of connection or communication. You have to be able to adjust your comms. As a former comms guy, I guess you got to be able to fucking figure it out.
Yeah, it's like the frequency almost, right? Okay, I have to change frequencies for this particular individual. Because look, a lot of people say, well, he just doesn't get it. Right. Well, if you're trying to communicate a message, it's your responsibility to ensure that he gets it, not his responsibility to ensure it's received. Like you're sending it, So that's your responsibility.
Yeah, if you're a teacher and you have 20 students and 50% of the class fails, whose fault is it?
Exactly.
It's definitely not the students. It's yours, right? And my daughters that are 7 and 3, I can't use the same style of communication with them as I do my employees.
Or even each other. They're so different too, their personalities and everything.
Yeah, so it's one of those things I think you constantly have to adjust and evolve and ask yourself, and I'm not the best at it. I do it. I definitely am. By far, am I saying I'm the best at it? I'm not trying to, break my arm to pat myself on the back, because there are times when I'm too fired up at times.
Sure, yeah.
I
know I have the problem of like, okay, my wife will even tell me, she's like, "Are you talking to me, your wife, or your guys right now?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got to adjust."
Yeah,
for sure.
My wife and I were doing this project on the house, and I was like, I came in one day and I was like, "This is what we're gonna do, X, Y, Z, like make these phone calls." And my wife was like, "What?"
Yeah, come again?
You might want to go back out and find yourself back into the company. If
right.
That's the way that you communicate over there. That's not the way you're going to get shit done here, because I'll just be, passive resistance type circumstance. And 2, you don't run this show. Like, this is my show here. And I'm like, okay, fair. You got it.
Okay.
You got it.
Let's fix this.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other problem with that dictatorship you were talking about is, even if you do get some level of compliance, let's say a business owner runs it like a dictatorship, he always has to be there.
Yeah.
Because if anything goes wrong, there's any sort of little wrench in the system or whatever, he hasn't given his people authority to be creative, to solve problems, to deal with it if I'm not around.
Right.
Because he has to have his nose and his hand in every little thing. I don't want to live I want to leave like I am now. I'm gone for a week.
Right.
I want to leave for a week and know that the Iron Council, which is our brotherhood, I want to know that I can be gone for a week and shit's not going to break down. Like, I've got people in place that are going to hold meetings, and if problems come up, we've got the chain of command in place.
Right.
That's infinitely more rewarding for me, because I can go do stuff like this.
Yeah, you can go, and I mean, that's one of the things that I love about having a business too. You can dip out for a weekend and take your kids to do something cool.
Right.
And yeah, you're connected, but it's one of those things between if we're, kind of staying on a military theme at times, it's a difference between developing a chain of command and in a coherent system of responsibilities and communication that ultimately, when we looked at like World War II and the difference between the Russian army, the German army, or the Nazis, and the Americans, we communicated, and we also had a very definitive chain of command. People could make decisions at a lower level. They didn't have to keep leveling it up and up and up.
That decentralized command concept, sure.
Yeah, and I think you have to, train, right? You have to train the trainer. You have to put people into tough situations. I think you have to give them the skills and ultimately the opportunity to succeed or fail. And depending on the situation, you can't eat their lunch on failure either, because then they're going to be afraid to fail.
Right. They won't step up.
Yeah. So you have to keep creating those situations, I think, in your life for the people around you. And when I say that, any person that's managing and leading across the board, they have places where they can apply situations to train people, and not like, I think there's this bad connection between being subservient and more of like a master, like a dog trainer or something like that. No, that's not what I'm referring to. Well, when in the military, I think guys are really, they're really connected to training and development. They understand it. They're always going to training. They're always developing. So we have a way closer connection with being able to be trained even by our peers. We don't have a negative connotation with this. And we're like,
it isn't like, so you're not being subservient to somebody else, like you're saying.
Just like hip pocket training, like you and your team are going out and doing hip pocket training. Like, somebody has to kind of organize the effort and execute on it.
Right.
And
then you come back and review it and fix it and whatever else you need to do.
Yeah. So applying the opportunity to train in a wide variety of circumstances, and then get people to understand, I think, when I say that, whether it's your family or your business, you have to look for those opportunities to to train.
Right.
Like you got to look for those opportunities to train.
Yeah. You know what's funny is I hear people say, and I think they have this completely backwards. They'll say things like, I don't want them to feel bad about their performance, and they act as if they're so worried about the other person. But I honestly believe in most cases that the reason people don't do this, they don't have the hard conversations, they don't allow their children to lead and then potentially fail, or their teammates to fail, is not to salvage that person,
right,
but to save themselves.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever been?
That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever been at like a speech or a comedy routine, and the guy's just like flopping, and you feel embarrassed for that individual, and it makes you uncomfortable? That's why people don't let other people, because it's not for the other person. It's like, I don't want to feel embarrassed, and they're trying to salvage themselves. It's very selfish.
Super selfish. It's difficult, right? It is difficult to be that person,
or to play the I don't want to be the bad guy,
that's the unfortunate thing, is you're going to have to be the bad guy in somebody's eyes when you're taking responsibility for your actions, you're making decisions, you're leading and managing. You're going to have to be the bad guy. That's just, now you don't have to be the bad guy all the time, but there are direct circumstances where people are not going to agree with your decision, and that will create conflict. And then you have to be able to navigate through the conflict. And you can't shy away from that, right? It's, it's so interesting. I think when I think about conflict management, leadership, and these are really interesting things that we could unpack probably for hours.
Sure. Yeah.
But conflict is something that people are so afraid of. And there is something, and I'm sure that there's plenty of consultants out there that probably get to bill millions of dollars a year on like conflict management, positive communication. It's like, or you can just suck it up. And I do this a lot where I just bring people in. I'm like, hey, what's your problem? What's your problem? What do you mean? I'm like, come on,
we know.
Come on. What's your problem? What's going on? Like, what's the issue? And then they'll like dick dance around a little bit and they're tap dancing. You're like, come on, out with it. Let's go. Like, just dig it out of them. And I don't know how many times I've had to dig stuff out of people. And then it's like, well, everybody else got this in the office and, I didn't get it. And then you're like, yeah, because you failed the last 2 quarters in a row. And, I didn't feel it was acceptable for you to do that. I apologize. I didn't communicate that clearly, but I felt I did. And they're like, well, no, you did, but I just don't like it. I still feel bad.
Right.
I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
Well, suck it up, Buttercup. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, the cool thing about doing it that way is it's hard, especially if you've never done it. Like, we have a lot of guys who listen to the podcast that they're more passive in nature. They're the proverbial, quote unquote, nice guy.
Yeah.
And so they don't even know how to have like a semi-confrontational conversation with somebody. But the interesting thing about it is if you do it right and you actually have a real conversation with your child or your wife or your employee or whoever it is, your business partner, whoever it is, it gets easier the next time.
Yeah.
Because the next time you're like, oh, okay, well, that was uncomfortable, but it wasn't the end of the world, and actually things improved. And so every time you do it, it gets easier. If you don't do it that way, everything else gets harder as you progress because there's this weird expectation or like, we don't talk about that stuff.
About that.
And then it just gets buried and nothing ever gets resolved or worked through.
When that happens, it's so interesting to me because like what you just explained is all forms of communication across the board, because there are times when you're digging out the problems, right? You got to dig them out. And then there are times when you're like, I don't know what the problem is and I can't quite address what the issue is until I go to work trying to figure out how to even address it and what I'm dealing with. And is it a personality conflict within a couple different people? Is it something that I might be doing? Is it something like personally that's going on in their lives? Is it, so it's so interesting how you have to kind of plug all those things in and having productive arguments. In, to your point, people don't want to do that. Right. I think I was telling you, yesterday I was telling you, I used to terminate people because I had managers that didn't want to do it.
Right.
So I was like, yeah, just send them my office. It's not a big deal. Like, just, hey, today's your last day. Here's
and
here's a sucker. I hope
and
you enjoyed the ride.
That, right? Like, you were comfortable doing that because you've done that and you've come to terms with that.
Yeah, and it's not easy, obviously, but
yeah, I mean, you don't take joy. I mean, maybe for some, maybe if you had to let somebody go, you might take joy, but for the most part, you don't take joy in it.
No, not at all.
Right,
and you don't have to do it very often. And most of the time, the conversations you have to have are months before that are the difficult ones that are saying, this is the expectation. You're failing to meet minimum expectation. This is how we're going to get you to this point. And then if you don't, this is your final warning. Right. So you can make those conversations easier by kind of laying in your performance improvement plan.
Sure.
Your performance improvement plan for yourself, because I've found myself in this situation a lot where I'm the person that's not communicating the right intent or commander's intent. And then I'm just kind of moving around in my life, just assuming people know what the hell I'm talking
they're
about.
All confused and everything
like,
else.
I don't know what the hell he's doing. What? And then you have to come back to yourself and have the same conversation you would have with somebody else. Put yourself on a performance improvement plan, schedule your meetings, put your topics out earlier, figure out how I'm going to do this. And it keeps going.
Right.
Like, it never stops.
Never ends.
It never ends. It's not as if you're going to reach a point where it's called communication nirvana and you're just like the best at it.
I'm here.
I'm really good. I'm the best. Here I am. I'm the best at communicating, It's like, oh shit, I made it,
Yeah. So when you started Black Rifle, you started in 2015, right?
Yeah, January 2015. To include, there's coffee over there. There's some good from another. I just got these handsome Green Berets cruising around here, just like regular Green Berets, ready to like pour coffee.
Yeah, pour coffee for you.
Thanks, man.
That's nice.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's super nice.
So as we're talking about working with people, communicating, having difficult conversations, I mean, this isn't real. Maybe it is. This is something that you really thought you'd be doing, 5 years, 6 years later now.
Yes and no. I always knew it was going to be some type of variant. This is way more complex and way more fun than I thought it would be.
It is now.
Oh, yeah. It's because it's a complex problem solve. It's complex problem solving. It's split decision making. It's strategic thinking. It's all of these great things. And so it's almost like I'm a kid in a candy store every day because I get to solve problems. That's what I do. And I'm kind of the master editor. And I can always find energy to do this stuff because it's so interesting across the board that I don't have to motivate. There's zero kind of me getting out of bed, giving myself a pep talk.
Right.
It's like,
dude,
I'm
do this.
Yeah, I'm like rolling out of bed in the morning going, hell yeah, I get another day at Black Rifle. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Like this is going to be great. So
are there days though that you have felt like that in the past where you're like, that maybe you've created a circumstance or a situation where you're like, what the hell? Like, this is what I created for myself and I don't want to do this and have had to pivot?
Yeah. A couple months ago that we went through kind of a PR issue, and it's just kind of beat up from the left and the right and kind of the fringe elements of both the internet. And it's not as if I was like in a low point. I would say it was just like we're used to winning, right? So we're used to winning and being positive and injecting positivity, and then when you have an active misinformation campaigns that are kind of running in tandem from both like sides of the internet,
from everywhere.
And then it's just, when you're trying to kind of push back against a false narrative, it becomes interesting because people start to think, or there's a section, right? This is your business and this is who you are. And this is what they've reduced your work, the encyclopedia of your work down to like a moment in time.
This one thing that was said or happened or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
And, I did. And I think the questions that I had for myself and my business wasn't necessarily about my intent. I don't question that. I question whether or not I even want some of my customers to be drinking my product or wearing my gear.
Why? What makes you say that?
Because I think there was a section of the brand that might have been hijacked by different. I mean, I saw Blackbeard Delight, which is my coffee roast from Blackbeard. I saw that patch being worn by both guys on the Antifa side and both on the alt-right side.
Right.
And I'm like, hey, man, I wore that in service of my country. I didn't wear it out on the fucking streets, trying to drag people into fistfights.
Yeah.
And, I definitely
standing up for these weird, fringe ideas that aren't helpful to anybody.
Well, and it makes me sick too, because there are elements where if people, for instance, right, if people are wearing a piece of clothing of mine and they're yelling traitor to like the law enforcement community or the people that serve our country.
Yeah.
I'm not on board with that. Just plain and simply, like, you have misinterpreted or grossly misinterpreted what my brand is, and who is it that we're trying to serve. Like, I carried a rifle for a living in a professional capacity for my adult life, and the country as a whole, just the United States. I love the country, and I'm galvanized and bonded to the people that serve their communities and love their communities. We were having that conversation yesterday. It makes me sick to my stomach to hear anti-law enforcement rhetoric, because I have so many friends that are serving in that capacity after they've already served in the military. And I know these guys. And so they're on the streets and they're taking it from both, fringe elements on the left, fringe elements on the right.
They're caught in the crossfire.
It saddens me, because I think that the country's better than that.
How do you deal with that though? So, you have these people who, let's just call it a misrepresentation of your brand and your values. I mean, it's not like you can say, I don't want that person wearing that, how do you qualify? It's like, how do you work that so that you maintain the integrity of your brand based on what it is you guys are trying to accomplish, not being hijacked by...
No, you have to just communicate the brand more effectively. And I think we have great brand partners. We have great people that we do content marketing with. And most of those people are friends. And most of those people represent the brand really well.
Sure, yeah. And those people you can select.
Sure.
Right? Like you can vet those individuals, they're friends, them, what they're all about. And then there's just other people, like we're talking, you just can't vet them.
You can't vet them. And there's always going to be, 340 million people in the United States. There's a section of the country, whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent or, they identify as a sloth, they're going to be crazy, right? There's going to be some guys that are people that are crazy, and you can't worry about that. At the end of the day, it's not as if we're asking people for affiliation before they buy a hat or a shirt.
Right, of course.
But what you can do is you can get out and, talk and communicate and build relationships and build content and media around what you do believe in.
Yeah. Well, I like that you guys are doing that, because I think there's a lot of organizations in conventional wisdom. It doesn't seem so much anymore, but conventional wisdom, especially in the business world, says, don't take a side. Don't talk about these things. Just sell your and you guys have actually done the exact opposite. We've done that too.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we're actually going to talk about real issues that are important, that we believe, that we know aren't always going to be the most popular discussions that are going to be had. And it goes against conventional wisdom, but I actually wish more people would get behind what they actually believe, as opposed to like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to touch that. Like, talk about it. These are the real things we ought to be talking about.
Well, and the other thing is people misinterpret, my political views for the company's political views all the time. I'm like, there's 400 plus people in this company.
Right.
And, whether we're having, we have complex, whether they're political or social discussions in the hallways and in the offices of our company every day. I like that. I like to hear varying opinions. It would be super weird for me to have a company where we were just a bunch of, bearded white guys walking lockstep in the same ideology. That would be one, it would be super weird. Two, it would be very boring. And
I think there's a lot of companies that are like that, where it's like, no, we all, and even if there's some sort of, rogue employee, they won't communicate their thoughts because they could actually get fired.
Yeah.
Right? They could actually lose their job, or not just their job, but their career could be completely wiped out just because they happen to believe the wrong thing politically, or, say something that maybe wasn't intended the way that it quite came across and it was a mistake,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think that's what I think, like, a lot of people maybe thought the company was before. It was just, maybe they just thought that's what it was. And I was like, and I was truly, there was a section of the customers that were emailing at times where it's like, man, I'm embarrassed of some of these people, because they were saying, derogatory or racist things. And I was like, whoa, one, that's not the company that we built.
Yeah.
That's not what I believe, nor it says we the people, right there in this fabulous document that everybody can read. And
everybody should read.
Yeah, everybody should read, and the gross misinterpretation of this is interesting, because it's always based on the quality of work and what you're bringing to the table. It has nothing to do with your genitalia or your race, right? It's just like, hey, we're all in this together. We're going to work through this problem, and may the best person ultimately rise to the occasion.
I think most people believe that. It has nothing to do with your sex, has nothing to do with the color of your skin. I think most people, the overwhelming majority of people believe that. But then I think there's these actors over here who are like, let's bring this into the equation. And it's like, and they start riling or like shaking the hornet's nest.
Sure.
It's like, it's never been about that. And the only reason it's about that now is because you're deliberately trying to make it about that. And it has nothing to do with race or sex or misogyny or whatever other term, homophobia, transphobia.
Whatever phobia this week.
It has nothing to do with that at all. But you're trying to rile people up either for their attention or for entertainment or for their money. Because if you get them riled up, then they'll, band with you, hopefully. It's like, it's so infuriating. It's like, we've never had this problem, but people are making it a problem. And we talked about it earlier, because they're making dumb shit the problem because they don't have anything like grander to worry about.
Yeah. And it's weird to see how this is happening, right? This is a national conversation. It's evolving all the time. So, whether you're hearing it from the left or the right in some circumstances, it happens where people are amplifying pieces of information and they're spinning each other. They're gaslighting. And it's interesting because this plays directly into our real strategic enemies. They really benefit from this. So they benefit from the direct manipulation of information, the gaslighting on both the left and the right, the massive misinformation campaigns across the board. And there are a few things where you're like, well, that's just crazy, right? Like defund the police. That's just a crazy idea. I don't even know where they came up with this. It's crazy.
There's people that like legitimately believe it though. And I've had conversations on social media with people who are self-described socialists. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, do you even know what you're saying? Have you studied it? Have you and the answer, of course, is no.
And then those move off into their echo chambers. And obviously we're so involved in some of this because of people being kicked off of social platforms and like deplatforming or Parler being shut down, all these different things that are going on. But ultimately, they don't have World War II. They don't have a Great Depression. The global war on terror is basically just white noise now, right? Which I'm not reducing it. I mean, I was an active participant in the global war on terror, but you never hear anything on the news about it. You don't hear about the guys that are in direct conflict every day overseas. It's just white noise, and it's constantly playing in the background, right? It's just the music that's playing in the American background. And then you amplify these arbitrary, somewhat ridiculous issues and make them these hills that, the Twitter mobs are going to die on. I guess, I mean, if that's an issue, but really, like, we have really big societal problems and international issues that we could focus on, you know, like this stupid debate that people are constantly having where, you know, the gender debate, right? That's constantly going on in the background. It's like, there is no difference between male or female or whatever. I'm like, okay, if you want to participate in that debate and go down the rabbit hole and, you know, unpack all that and maybe take multiple, you know, courses on, you know, human evolution and gender theory and all that, like, that sounds crazy to me. One, like, that's a way
we already know the answers to.
We got it.
It's already well established.
We got it, right? Yeah. And it's like, and I'm not saying that, you know, that I know everything about this. I'm just like, I've been a participant as a human for a long period of time, and it's pretty easy to differentiate between male and female and then the in-betweens, right? Course. Sure, it's pretty easy. And I'm not discriminating against anybody in that circumstance. I'm just not going to go down the rabbit hole with this and try to be drug into a national conversation, which ultimately I'm like, is it going to pay a positive return, or should I spend my time focused on a subculture and a group of veterans and, you know, my subculture and my veterans to increase the positivity in their lives, because I know a lot about the subculture. Yeah. I know a lot about the people. I know where I can have a positive impact. If I just don't want to participate in this conversation, go, hey, male, female, and the other, by all means.
Whatever.
Can we do the 3? And then can you just be cool with me just saying, like, that's the 3? You know what I mean? Like, No,
we cannot be cool with that.
We can't be cool with that.
Yeah, but, you know, there's also, I think, a balance between being involved in, and I actually, the way you said it was actually interesting, because it was said really well about, I'm going to focus on this, and then it leads me to believe that there's other people who want to focus on this, and people who want to focus on these other things, and so collectively we're all focusing on issues. But I also think there's a tendency, and I know I fall into this, it's not a trap, but it's my personality, where I say, just leave me out of it. I'm going to go over here and focus on my guys and my family, and I'm going to work in my little community, and, you know, this is my bubble, right? But then that also opens up threats that do actually need to be addressed. And so the answer isn't to completely isolate yourself or to completely immerse yourself in the chaos. It's like, where's the balance between being informed and helping on a community or city or state or national level, and then being involved with your community, like you said?
Well, and we only have so much time here, right? We only have so much time, so much physical capability and intellectual capacity. We can't know everything. Like, it's completely impossible. And I think what's happened with people's access to the internet and Google is that one person's, you know, hill they want to die on, or their issue, that becomes something important to them and that group of people. And their expectation is that everybody else is going to know.
It should be just as important to everybody.
It should be just as important to everybody else. And then when you tell people to go, like, pound sand, like, that's not my issue, I don't care about it, then it's like, oh, you don't care about these issues. And it's like, no, man.
It's insensitive and it's a microaggression.
It's
right. Yeah.
No, we're not saying anything about that. We just don't care about it. And I just want to, like, live my life and, like, do the good that I can do. And I'm only so smart and only so physically capable, so I can't solve all the world's problems, nor can I know everything about everything. So can we just kind of, like, agree that there's an expectation that people are just going to be dumb about some shit?
No, but I mean, you said that, you say that, and you said it before. I on it, like, can we just agree that there's just the 3? And can we just agree that, and the answer is no.
No, you can't.
Because there's a bunch of guys like us who are like, I just actually want to be left alone. Just leave me alone. Let's follow the law of the land. Let's adhere to the Constitution, and then let's have some experiences, put some money in the bank account, you know, have some meaningful relationships, and, like, that's it. But then there's other people who are like, no, I actually don't want you to have that.
Exactly.
Because I don't have it, and you have it, and so you must have taken it from me, and so now you're my enemy. So we say, can't you just leave it alone? And there's other people who are like, no, I'm not going to leave it alone.
Unfortunately, you're right. You're exactly right. There's millions of people that have decided, and this is the thing that always breaks my brain when I start really unpacking it and trying to figure it out. And I don't understand why there's a group of people in the United States that are trying so hard to control another group of people. They want, and I'm saying either side, whoever it is, right? It's a political party affiliation, and they're trying to enforce and take away liberty from some section of some other section of the country, right? And my answer is, can we just, if we could all just agree that we want to be free, because that's a premise of a lot of these different arguments is this is right or this is wrong. And it's like, well, how about we just don't have the government weigh in on some of this?
That's exactly right. I even think that with like gay marriage. People, what about gay marriage? I'm like, look, I'm straight. I like women. Sure. My wife and I have been married for almost 17 years now. I believe in traditional marriage and the nuclear family. Well, we don't believe in that. Cool. Then go do your thing.
Go do your thing.
The government doesn't need to be involved in that.
Right.
Like if you love a dude, then cool. Go do that. That doesn't impact me.
Doesn't impact me. As long as it's not kids or animals that I care about. Like, I don't care what you do with your genitalia at the end of the day. Like, I really don't. And that's been this national conversation from, conservatives and liberals alike, where it's like, we want this and we want to force you, for instance, in the circumstances of it has to be illegal. Like, why? Why do we care if the government's involved in this whatsoever? Yes. We should be actively looking for, from my perspective, we should always be actively looking for things that we can take off the government's plate.
Yes.
Yeah. You guys don't want to be involved in this. Let's go ahead and just take that back.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Let's not do that. Instead of both parties complaining about, and I always use marijuana as the example because it's a liberal issue, right? And then conservatives push back against it. And I kind of land in the bucket of it's about freedom for me.
Right.
And if you want to, smoke marijuana, I don't think the federal government should be, and my tax dollars should be going to pay or subsidize people being incarcerated for it. I just don't think that's an appropriate expense for my taxpayer dollars.
I agree with that.
I just don't think it's appropriate. So, when we go to the liberal side of the conversation, they're like, it should be legal, it should be legal, it should be legal. I'm like, yeah, sure, I agree.
Sure, yeah.
Conservatives are like, no, it shouldn't be. It's like, but why? Why do you want to spend my taxpayer dollars telling somebody else that they can't smoke marijuana when it's legal in like half these states or whatever it is? Like, It just doesn't make sense to me. But then we get to guns.
Yeah.
Right? And then it flips.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true.
Then it flips. It's like, the liberals are trying so hard, or at least a section of liberal America is trying so hard to take our Second Amendment right. Right?
No. Nobody's coming after your guns, man.
Nobody. Right? And they're trying so hard. And it's like, can you guys just leave us the fuck alone? Like leave us all alone. Can you can keep your marijuana? Can we keep our guns? Can we come to the table and just broker a deal? Like keep your pot. We get to keep our guns. Can we all be cool? You guys can marry, anybody you want. Keep your marijuana. I don't know all the other things that you might want to do.
There's an infinite number of things.
There's an infinite.
Yes, of course.
But hey, just don't mess with my guns.
Don't mess with me.
Well, the other thing is, so I kind of fall on both sides of this conversation a lot of times because it's like freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Hot topic right now. I tend to agree with the ACLU's circumstance, or at least their position, which is free speech needs to be protected at all points.
Sure.
So it doesn't matter, free speech is not a government buffet where they get to decide what you're going to eat.
Right.
It's like, no.
Yeah, this is free, this is not.
This is free,
no,
this is not.
All of it is. Even if you're uncomfortable with it. People say some crazy shit. I'm like, I don't agree with that. In fact, yeah, that's bad.
Super
bad.
But
still, you should be able to say, unless you're inciting violence or actively threatening, that's different.
So that's
right.
That's threat and intimidation.
Exactly.
But ideas, with the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, obviously our Bill of Rights, when we look at these things, we look at how important it is to maintain individual sovereignty, right? And looking for those opportunities to regain, our liberty ultimately. The Second Amendment and the First Amendment both, and then you can't just press mute. It doesn't work that way. And when you're trying to silence and subjugate a certain section of our society, which ultimately I think the government should have nothing to do with. I think it's a super bad idea if we keep asking our government officials to make decisions because it's a one-size-fits-all 50-state solution, which is just going to be a really ill-fitting shoe at the end of the day.
But the thing I don't understand is I don't understand how so many people believe that the government, which is comprised of flawed individuals just like ourselves, will somehow rise above the temptations and the nasty and horrible things that we as humans, individuals do, that somehow the government will be above that they'll be able to be virtuous. It's like, no, like there's no, that's a collection of people that are just as flawed as you and me. And with that power, they are going to exercise that power against you. And you know what? When it falls in your favor, you're going to be really excited. When it's used against you, and it will be used against you, you're going to be pretty upset that you allowed that to happen. Like, the government isn't virtuous just because it's the government. It's comprised of people, and some of those people are corrupt and nasty. Others are not, but it's people.
It's people, and it's systems, and it's bureaucratic, and it's flawed, and it's so when you know that about the system, right? Why do you keep going back to the system? It's like the system isn't perfect. It's not a perfect solution for everybody. And it's been so interesting for me to hear these conversations over the last couple of years because, you'll have, for instance, just like kind of retracing it, but, you had the left that was anti-war, right? Unless it's a Democrat in office, and then they're like pro-war, and then it's the Republicans in office, then it's like and then the Republican, in Trump's circumstance, he's saying we got to pull our troops back, we got to have but now we're pro-war because really what matters is they're anti-president
or party,
right? And so they're showing their cards.
Yes.
So they're all showing their cards, and as American citizens, we should all be paying attention. Going, dude, they're just showing their cards.
Yeah.
They're showing us what they're all about.
Right.
Like they're voting uniformly in lockstep with their party.
George Washington, have you ever read his farewell address?
I haven't.
You should go through his farewell address because he warns of things, and one of his biggest warnings is the two-party system being pitted against each other and used against each other. So, as the first president of the United States, he said this will happen. Like he predicted the two-party system and what it would eventually do to itself.
Really?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, I'll have to go back and read that. I'm actually reading his biography right now.
Yeah, fascinating.
It's a fascinating individual.
Yeah, for sure.
And as I start to look at kind of politics today, and I've been flashing back, I went through Alexander Hamilton and Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Adams, and just the founding fathers. And I think it's important for people to, especially me, I don't know if everybody who cares, just me. Just to kind of calibrate the conversation too, because like politics, even as George Washington was going through his second term, he was being mudsucked and hit below the belt by newspapers and guys within his own administration, and like he was just being mudsucked, and it was wearing him out. Like it wore him out. Ultimately, physically, emotionally,
he was beat down.
He was beat down, and I thought about that because politics hasn't changed, right? It really has.
Worse. At the root, I think it's the same, but it's worse because it's easier to get after people.
Well, and if you have a blue check mark, that means you know something,
right?
Which is that's just flawed,
of course.
Right? So it's like, what does Cardi B really have to tell us about politics in America?
Well, the other thing is who gave again. This goes to people. Who gave the person the blue check? Another person.
Yeah, another person.
That is flawed and has bias and isn't smart. So
it's like some person in a cubicle in Silicon Valley like pressing buttons because they have a news story that links to this.
Yes.
And they meet the criteria. Now you have a blue check mark, or you made an album of some sort, or it doesn't mean the person has any substance or experience that they can admittedly interject into a conversation with any real substance.
Right.
Like there's no substantive argument that they can interject and say things that make any sense. And when we look at the national conversation, just in general, I have a hard time kind of listening to some of these people, especially if they're political pundits or even people that are talking about politics or anything business related. Like, what is this person's background? How can they weigh in on this and have any justification for the information they're putting out unless I know the person? I think that's why podcasts are so incredible, because like I know you, I know Jocko, I know
sitting down,
I know these guys, and I know their experience, I know their personal experience, and I know that if you say something, I'm going to listen.
Sure.
Go, oh yeah,
there's some credibility.
Ryan's got a
there.
good point.
Yeah. Well, I think we tend to look for the path of least resistance. So I'll give you an example. As I was flying out here, I got off the plane and I saw this young couple in front of me. They were on the plane with me. They were a couple rows ahead of me, and I had to go to baggage claim. So I'm walking down the thing, and I realized, I don't know why it hit me, but I realized I wasn't looking at signs of where the baggage claim was. I was following them. And it was weird. It hit me all of a sudden. I'm like, why the hell am I following them?
Right.
Well, I'm following them because they look like they know where they're going, and they clearly knew where they were going. And they were on the plane with me.
Right.
So, like, I'll just follow them.
Just following them.
And then I realized as I came to this conclusion, that they were leaving, and they didn't have to go to the baggage claim because they were, they didn't have any check bags or whatever.
Right.
I'm like, that's what we do.
Yeah.
We follow these people because we think they know, or, they maybe they're credible in one area of life. And so we just assume that because they're a good singer or a good football player, that now they know politics, and we just follow them blindly, and they're not even going to the baggage claim.
Yeah. They're not going to the same spot.
Exactly.
You are.
Yeah.
It's like, if we follow a sports star or, a NASCAR driver or a musician, there's truly, depending on the circumstance, they might not have anything of substance they have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if I have anything of substance that people would ever want to listen to either, but at the end of the day.
No, you do. I think but you recognize it too, I think, is like, you speak in your lane, right? And that's not to say that you can't have opinions about other things, but when it comes to business, clearly you have some things to share about business because you're running a successful business. But you get into problems and I'll have people, when I was in the financial planning industry, I had people, I'd sit down with them and talk with them, a young couple, for example, and we'd work through their strategies, and, I was educated to talk about this stuff. Right. And they'd say, oh, well, I really want to go talk with my folks. I'm like, well, tell me about your folks. Oh, they're broke.
Yeah.
Or they're up to their eyeballs in debt. Why the hell do you want to talk with them about that?
Right.
What are they going to tell you?
Right.
They're going to tell you how to get into debt because that's all they know. So I think it's okay to recognize what we're good at and acknowledge it. And then also say, I don't know anything about that.
Well, I recognize it in the sense of, I think we have such a short time frame on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And human beings we stretch it out, we get 100 years here, right? And it's a small blip compared to the overall time frame of this thing spinning around.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only so much you can collect. I mean, in this gray matter up here.
Sure.
And then you have all these different emotions, whether it's ego or, whatever types of drive that you're going to plug into this. There's only so much of substance you can truly commit and then contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I don't think that I have a lot to contribute necessarily, other than saying, this is my thought. Maybe that will inspire somebody else to think a little bit more, or go, boy, that's really stupid. I should.
I'm not going to do that.
I'm not going to think that way. That's dumb.
Right.
It's dumb as shit. And, I think as a group of guys, as we kind of float around here in this ecosystem, and this is one of the things I love about like you and Andy Stump and all these other guys that I know in the podcasting world, because we just throw out, you're much better at it. And I'm not saying that in a, like like, oh my God, you're so good.
You can do that like that. You can do it like that.
You're better at it. You are. This is your, I think this is part of your calling in this context is you're better at formatting information, really getting to the point. And I enjoy listening to other people discuss different ideas and topics. And I don't even like listening to myself. I think that's kind of natural for a lot of people. But if it's experience-based knowledge that people want to know about, like I know a few things, right?
Sure,
like,
yeah.
I know how to, be a fairly competent, gunfighter at the end of the day. It's still not perishable skill. I know how to lead and manage a couple people in order to solve problems. And I know how to like curate responsibility among like a family unit. So my kids and my wife don't ultimately hate me and they might be good, productive people, right?
Might grow into something.
Yeah. But, like you when you listen or read guys that are truly impactful in what they do, like I'm never going to be Warren Buffett, for instance, right? I'm never going to have the passion that guy has to turn a penny into a dollar. I like building ecosystems and creating these things that are interesting to me and ultimately I think beneficial on the second and third order effects of what's happening. But I only have so much mental capacity or intellectual
There's only so much
capability.
bandwidth, right?
And I'm not that smart of a guy. At the end of the day, and the reason I say that is like I've talked to really, as you have to, really smart people, and when you're just outgunned. When you're like, holy shit.
Like I even get, there's, conversations where you just get intimidated because you're like, this guy's, and you just nod your head. You're like, I don't know what you're saying right now, but okay.
Your jaw just kind of drops.
Sounds right to me.
You're good. Good noises make pretty stuff, and you're like, yeah, that's cool, man. Like, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I get it.
And that's the thing, like, which for me, if I'm going to turn the conversation back on you now, which is, we started roughly in the similar
time,
couple months of one another. So when you started it, is this where you saw yourself?
No. So I was doing the financial planning practice stuff, and I just wanted to have conversations with guys I thought could help me be a better dad and business owner.
Right.
Like legit, that's why I started. Because I'm like, I don't really know how to be a father or husband. The business was doing fairly well, my financial planning practice, but I'm like, I'd like to blow this up and really grow it better. And I could get one-on-one coaching if I do a podcast, because I had another podcast before this one.
What was it?
It was called Wealth Anatomy. So it was teaching financial services to medical professionals.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So that's what I did. I'm like, man, I could do a podcast like I've been doing, but I could talk about, how to be a better man.
Right.
And I could get free one-on-one coaching from these guys.
That's it.
And in exchange, I would just publish it to the 5 people that would listen.
Right.
And then I did my first podcast and it blew up. Blew up.
Number one.
The first podcast.
Seriously?
It did more downloads than the entire podcasting of Wealth Anatomy had done for
what was it?
20 episodes.
What was your first episode?
It was like why I'm doing this.
Right.
Why I think being a man's important, some things that we're going to cover and talk about, some things that I wanted to explore and get better at. And we were off to the races, man. So I just did it as a side thing. And then I realized pretty quickly because of that, like how valuable it was.
Right.
So I started talking more and more about this stuff and doing more podcasts. And my wife came to me one day and she's like, hey, like you seem really happy with what you're doing and like you're fulfilled and you like it, but you're not doing as much financial planning and you're not making any money doing this.
Right.
So you should probably think about your priorities or find a way to make money. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to quit doing this. So yeah, I think I was 8 months into it and we started a course. And I remember the first guy that signed up for it, my thought was, what an idiot.
What an idiot.
I was like, this guy doesn't know me. I still have that email. He's actually a friend of mine still. And I still have the email that I sent to him. It was like, hey, thanks. Like, now there's 2 of us doing this thing. This is cool.
Right.
And yeah, so that was, I think that was 7 or 8 months after I started. And that for me was like a light bulb moment that I could add value to people's lives in exchange for value, right?
Right.
Monetary transactions online with people that I had never even met.
Right.
That wasn't even like a thing that I knew existed. Well, I knew it existed, but I didn't think I could create it for myself.
So when When you kind of sat down and you put pencil to paper on this, did you write out your business plan?
No. I'm not.
Yeah.
I've never been like that.
Really?
Yeah, it's like, that sounds good. Let's try it.
Right.
And then I'll figure it out along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's way more efficient ways to do it. I don't know if I just don't have the patience, or I get bored really quickly maybe. But I'm like, I don't know, let's just try it. And if I like it, then we'll adjust it. And if I don't, then I haven't put a bunch of time and effort into it, and then I can pivot real quick. So I still don't have a business plan. I still haven't sat, I don't know if I ever will, like sit down and like really hash that stuff out.
Yeah, I don't think I think it works conceptually, like in universities and a few places, but ultimately you got to test stuff and figure out if it works.
Well, and then the thing I always say is, I don't even know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, let alone what opportunities could present themselves. 6 years ago, podcasting, I wouldn't have thought about that.
Yeah.
Or, doing live events or even consider, would anybody have predicted COVID and how that would impact people's lives negatively and frankly, some people's positively.
Right.
You wouldn't have predicted it. And if you had this like stringent thing, like I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 100. And, on this date, I'm going to get item number 50 done. I just think you handcuff yourself to opportunities. And you even said it as we were talking earlier, is like life's short. Like we don't have a whole lot of time or bandwidth. So I want to pursue things that are interesting to me. And if next year Order of Man isn't it might not be. I don't know. I don't have any plans, but there might be something else. I'm like, nah, I'm going to do that now. And I'm okay with that. Yeah,
I think that's one thing for me too, is I know I've got a short time here, right? Mm-hmm. And, we don't know. Tomorrow we could roll out of bed and like, oh man, I got a pain in my side.
Right.
And pancreatic cancer, you're dead, 2 days later or whatever it is. And I was trying to explain that to my wife. I'm like, I'm a very impatient person, right? So I'm trying to get it all in before I leave. Got to get it all in. I got to love everybody. I got to create some positivity. I got to have some fun. And but the bang for the buck, and the couple of questions I want to run by you was like, when you're looking at kind of where you came from and where this is now, what's your azimuth? Like what is it that's pointing you in the direction when you roll out of bed? What's kicking you in your ass?
So for me personally, I'll talk about personally and professionally, but personally it's, and I know this sounds trite, like it's just to be the maximum version of myself. So how do I get better? How do I make myself more capable? How do I learn new skills that may or may not be applicable down the road? How do I communicate more effectively? How do I better teach and train and coach my children so that they'll be able to go out and have the life that took me, I think, longer than maybe it should have if I would have had some of this guidance? How do I make sure that my wife knows that I love her and that I'm committed to her? Like, so I just want to put all of that into action. That's what drives me. And so I'll ask myself, is this helping? Is being out here? And this is hard. This is actually, frankly, for me to be away from my family. I don't particularly enjoy traveling without them. So I have to wrestle with that. Like the balance between being out here and pursuing things. Like, is this conversation making me a better person? Yeah, absolutely. But that's a question I ask myself all the time.
Right.
And then I have that as a litmus test to say, no, that's actually not helping me be a better person. Right. So I'm not going to do that anymore. But professionally, it's to help guys do the same. To have some confidence, to have some meaning and purpose in their life. And I just see a lot of young and old men who don't have any purpose.
Yeah.
Like they're rudderless. They've got the energy, they've got the desire, but they just don't know how to channel it. It's like, just take that and focus on this. And so that's what we're doing. We're giving those guys the fuel and the channel to be able to maximize their lives and have some of that meaning and significance.
This will be a strange question, right? Which is, what is it though? Like when you say meaning and you're trying to dive into the meaning of what does it mean to be a man?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I've obviously I've thought a lot about this. So I talk about it in the context of, my 3 sons. I have 3 sons and a daughter, and my 3 sons are boys. They're males, but they're boys. They're not expected to be men.
Right.
So what's the difference, right? Obviously age, right? But really it comes down to responsibility and accountability. They have none. Mm-hmm. You know, they have to do their dishes at night, and they, you know, if they do something they shouldn't be doing, there's some discipline and some accountability that comes with that. Sure. But they're not responsible and accountable for themselves. Like I am. Mm-hmm. So when they start to make that switch from young man to man, what's the difference? The difference is now they're responsible and accountable not only for themselves, but for other people.
Right.
That's why you have 40-year-old men, boys, males, we'll call them, who are in mommy and daddy's basement, no accountability, no responsibility, no bills, no mortgage, no nothing, and they're playing video games and waiting for the latest PS5 or whatever it is they're on now, what version they're on.
Right.
That's not a man.
Right.
That's a male. That's an adult male, but certainly not a man.
Right.
And then from there, and this goes back to my azimuth, like you said, is to be a better protector, provider, and presider. That's my 3 core tenets of not only my personal life, but masculinity. Protect, and this is for yourself and people. Protect, provide, preside, which is synonymous with lead. Mm-hmm. That's what it means to be a man.
And so when you sat down a few years ago, were you looking at yourself saying, this is who I want to be, so I can identify my strengths and weaknesses?
It was never, this is who I am.
Got it. Right.
If that's what you're asking.
Yeah, that's what
it was never that.
Right.
I've never because people will say every once in a while, they'll say, well, what makes you the authority on blah, blah, blah.
Right.
No one. I'm not the authority. I'm on the path.
Right.
Like I'm trying to figure it out. So the only thing and I tell people this, the only thing that qualifies me to do this work is that I'm a man and I'm passionate about it. Like I want to learn. I want to grow.
Right.
Like if I wasn't interested in learning about this stuff, I wouldn't have interviewed now, I think, over 350 men.
Yeah.
Like I'm in this thing.
Yeah.
Because I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to get better. So yeah, it's never been about me being like the authority and all the followers who are following me and my directives.
Right.
It's like, let's do this together, and I'm going to be out ahead of you on some things, and some of you are going to be out ahead of me, and I'll turn to you for advice, but we'll do it shoulder to shoulder.
Right.
I think that's why people resonate with it. We were talking about it.
Yeah.
There's other movements out there that are ego driven where it's like, well, I'm doing this to prop myself up, and then I'm going to have these followers, and they're going to push me up. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's nice. That feels good, you know, but that's not me. Like I want to do it together. Like I want to grow together. I want to lead. I want to follow when I need to follow. Like that's how I see it working better.
And what have been the big surprises in the last few years that you kind of entered in one space? You're making this transition away from financial advisory.
Yeah.
Right? And then you started on this path, and you have to have hit some places where you're like, wow, I did not expect this road to take me here.
So I had this, he's a friend of mine, and we met when I was a financial advisor, and he was a coach for one of the planning tools that we use. So he would come to our agency and he would coach, you know, the 20 of us there, and he would teach us how to use this tool effectively for our clients.
Right.
And I remember sitting in the office with him and him going through his thing, and years later, he reached out to me. He's like, hey, man, I don't know if you remember me. I was one of your instructors for this thing. I said, yeah, I remember you. And he said something very interesting to me. And at first I was like taken back. I was almost like insulted a little. And then I thought about it more. I'm like, no, that's actually really cool. He said, I would have never guessed that he's like, I remember watching you in one of those sessions, and I would have never guessed that you would do what you're doing right now. And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, you just seem like an average guy, like no excitement, no enthusiasm. Like you were there, you were present, but like you didn't seem like you were excelling or a superstar. And so that's why I felt like insulted at first.
Right.
And then I was like, no, actually that's cool, because that's every man. Mm-hmm. Like every man that I've ever like talked with doesn't feel special.
Right.
And yet you can take, like me, I don't feel special. I feel like he said, I feel like a pretty average guy. And then to think about what we've created, when I get emails and messages from guys who are like, hey, I saved my marriage, or I lost 50 pounds, or I just started my business, or I secured a promotion, or I asked that woman on a date.
Right.
I'm like, I helped you do that. That's rewarding. That's super fulfilling for me.
Yeah, I could see that. And it's weird. Not weird, but it's interesting because I've seen you kind of move into a different form too. When you guys made the move to Maine, it was like, Man, it seems like you're hitting it seems like you're hitting a really good personal and professional stride. That to me seemed like a really
that's a good point. I feel like that. Like I feel like maybe for the first time in my life, feel like I know where I'm supposed to be and where I'm supposed to go. And I see a lot of these people on Instagram and other podcasts I follow, and they're all about business. And I think that's great. I'm a businessman. I like business, but I don't see enough people talking about leading their families. And how often they're there and the autonomy they have to be able to take them on a vacation or take your son on a hunt or go to your daughter's dance recital or coach your kids' team, and so like one of the things we're doing right now is we're building a canoe.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. And it's like, I would have never done that before, but now I'm like, well, why not? And I think that comes with a level of confidence of just putting myself out there enough, feeling good about the growth and progression I've had, that you kind of step into your own a little bit. And so I feel like I've finally, to a degree, it sounds so lame, but figured out like who I am,
Yeah.
That's how I feel. Like, and I've always felt like awkward, like that's not me. Even as a financial advisor, I'm like, and I've got a buddy that I got into the business with, and we talk every once in a while, and we got into business at the same time. And he'll tell you, I told him for years, I'm like, man, I'm not going to be doing this forever. Like, I'm meant to do something different for like something more. And he's like, really, what? I'm like, I don't know. I just know it's not this. And to turn around and look about those conversations we had and to see how far we've come, it's pretty amazing.
Was that a intellectual, spiritual thing?
That feeling?
Yeah.
Spiritual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just spiritual. It's just, I can't even describe it. I just felt like, I felt insignificant where I was.
Right.
But my performance was pretty good. But I still felt shallow and hollow and empty. So I'm like, well, I'm making multiple six figures with a business. I've got this beautiful family. We've got a couple of different properties. Like on the outside, things are awesome, man. And people hear that and they think, well, I want that.
Right.
I didn't want that. I mean, I wanted that, but like something was missing.
Well, that's an interesting point because people, I see this a lot, and I don't know if you see the same thing, but I see a lot of people that are pursuing a templated life that they think will ultimately lead them to fulfillment and happiness. And they're looking at other people and they're kind of conforming to that, saying, okay, I got it all.
Right.
Why am I still unhappy?
Right.
And
you're chasing other people's dreams.
Right.
Like I follow this guy on Instagram, and I've reached out to him. His name's Trent Presler, I think is how you pronounce his last name, just because of the canoe that I'm building. And the guy builds canoes. Like, that's his job. That's his life. That's what he does. He builds these big, beautiful canoes. And I'm like, that's rad. Like, that guy builds, I don't know, maybe 20, maybe not even 20 canoes a year.
Right.
And people pay him a lot of money to do it, but he's doing his passion. He's very excited. He's very artistic, but he's analytical about the way that he approaches it and very scientific, but artistic. And I'm like, man, that's his avenue. He seems like he's in his zone. Right. And then you have Jordan Peterson, who we were talking about earlier. That's his zone. And you and like all these guys that we follow, and there's no, you have to do it this way.
Right.
And I think that's the old way of doing it. But the new way of doing it is whatever way you want.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing about the culture that we've created, is that we can do it however we want and you can be successful. But I think you have to find that balance. Like, if you're just pursuing the career, the money or whatever, I mean, you'll get it, you will, but it's going to be hot. Like, if you don't have anybody to share it with, you're not doing cool things or like, or flexing that creative muscle, like, you're going to feel shallow.
Yeah. And that's the question, which is, when you left your previous profession and stepped off into the abyss, ultimately is what you did, right? Because there is no safety net in business. There is no safety net. I walked away
from a multiple six-figure residual income.
Right.
Like, I'm out.
And how hard was that?
It was super hard.
Yeah.
I delayed it longer than I should have because it was scary.
Yeah.
But I remember getting this phone call from one of my clients, and I remember looking at my phone and I just went, ugh. Not because of the client, but because I just didn't want to have that conversation. Like, I'm like, really? I got to talk about the stock market again?
Right.
And so at that point, I'm like, all right, I got to come up with a plan to get out of this. And I'd already been doing order of man at the time, but I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to ramp this up. I need to turn this into a business.
And so now that you've done that, you look back on yourself. Mm-hmm. And like you said, I should have left this earlier.
Way earlier.
Because do you find yourself happier now than you were, or is it more of not necessarily happiness?
I don't like that word in this context.
I don't either, but it's just
I know. I want to try to bring some edges to that, because people say, like, I just want to be happy. And when I hear happy, I just think like blissfully, like skipping through the forest and all the birds are chirping, and
that's like some freshman college bullshit where they're just like, oh, like we used to joking around last night. It's like, follow your passion,
right?
Never work another day in your life. It's like, hey, I can read Pinterest memes too, man.
Right? Like, so I don't want to be happy. Like, there's days where, well, there's a lot of days where I'm not I'm actually not a happy person,
right?
But there isn't a day that goes by now that I'm not fulfilled.
Gotcha.
And I think that's what I'm after. And so I think the difference between fulfillment and happiness, and some of you might think, oh, it's just semantics, and maybe it is, but here's how I look at it. Happiness is just blissful ignorance.
Yeah.
Like, everything's fine, the sun's shining, the birds are chirping, life is good, and okay, good. But what's your challenge?
Right.
Like, what are you pushing up against? What's pushing up against you? And so what I found with the business, Order of Man, and also fatherhood and being a husband, it's hard shit. Like, it's challenging. But it's also rewarding. It's the challenge that I want. Like, that's the challenge I want to face. There's other challenges where I'm like, I don't want to do, like, you went running this morning, and I'm like, I don't want to run, because, like, it would be challenging for sure, but I don't want to do that, So I think you got to find something that, and this is what I was going to say fortunate. I'm not fortunate, because that's too passive. Mm-hmm. But I found a little bit of interest in something, which was podcasting, because I was doing it for my business. And I just said, what if I just took one more step into that?
Right.
And then I took another step, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. What if I took one more step and one more step and one more step? And then you take 1,000 steps and you look back and see how far you've come. So I'm not happy, but I'm definitely fulfilled.
Yeah. And that's the interesting word. And you and I have talked for the last day on fulfillment and happiness and a few of these things, and people get those things really confused, right? They get, because we're putting words to ultimately, emotions that could be combined with physicality, and intellectual capacity, and long-term goal setting, and like, oh, it's so complex, right? It's like the human behavior and mind, it's so complex. But when you look at fulfillment itself as a word, define that in your words for you.
Fulfillment to me is finding a meaningful challenge and making yourself capable of dealing with it. Mm-hmm. That makes you, right? Because now, okay, I got this challenge, and it's hard, and it sucks at times. And that's another thing that people think. They think, oh, if I'm on the right path, everything will be perfect.
Yeah.
It's like, no, there's going to be some real shitty days. Yeah. I have days like that. I'm like, God, I don't want to deal with this. I have to deal with this. But it's the fulfillment, because it's a meaningful challenge. And I'm like, okay, well, what do I need to do? You talk about problem solving earlier. What do I need to do to be able to be capable of dealing with that thing? Mm-hmm. And there's days where I'm incapable of dealing with something I might address in the business. But that's pretty cool, because tomorrow or in a week or a month or whatever, when I learn that new skill, now I'm capable. I remember even if we're talking about money, for example, in the business, the second year of Order of Man, we made a lot of money, like more than I'd ever made in my life. And I got on the phone with my accountant, and he's like, well, here's your tax bill. And I hadn't paid quarterly or any of that. And I'm a financial advisor.
Right.
And I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, are you serious? He's like, yeah. I'm like, what do I need to do? And he's like, well, you need to pay it. And then here's what you need to do. The next year, I did the quarterlies. We did the estimates. Everything was fine. At the end of the year, I'm like, good. Now I'm capable of dealing with that. And the thing about it is, you don't get to graduate until you learn the lesson.
Right.
So people say this all the time. Oh, bad stuff keeps happening to me, and this thing keeps happening and coming up. It's like, yeah, because you haven't learned the lesson.
Right.
Like, make yourself capable of dealing with that. And other people will say, well, if I didn't have any problems, like, no, you shouldn't try to make your problems go away. You should be elevating your problems. Like today, you should be dealing with better, more complicated, more complex, more rewarding problems than you did yesterday.
Right.
If your problems don't go away, they just get better.
Yeah.
I'm like, these are better problems. Like you worrying about fulfilling payroll with 400 plus employees, that's a better problem than paying your mortgage.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because if you can solve that 440, your mortgage just becomes like a...
Exactly.
You don't so even far in the rearview mirror, you're like, I don't fucking know.
And that's what you should be doing. How do I but how do I solve better problems for myself?
Yeah, I think people, they often get those things confused. The men that I talk to, and we talk about these things like fulfillment, or fulfillment, goals, objectives, spirituality, a wide variety of really complex things. And people, you touched on it, which is they confuse fulfillment with happiness.
Yes.
And happiness with ignorance and ultimately complacency, because they're just kind of like, they think doing nothing is going to make them happy. And I'm like, no. Like, you're so far off.
Yeah.
You need to put yourself back on this map sheet because you're not even on the right quadrant, dude. Like, you got to bury yourself in the work.
The analogy I use is, if you want to know the difference between the two, just go sit on the beach. And men have a hard time with this, I think. Just go sit on the beach and just try to sit there for 3 hours, like in suntan.
Right.
Like, there's no man in the world who could do that. Because it's horrible.
It's horrible.
The sun's shining.
Yeah.
You've got the ocean, the surf spread. Like, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
You're happy, but you're miserable.
Yeah.
You can't sit there for very long.
No.
You got to be doing something. So what do? You go, like, I always bring a shovel to the beach because I dig a hole and we play King of the Hole with my kids.
Right.
Meaning. I just gave this beautiful surrounding meaning and purpose, connecting with my kids, playing, getting stronger. That's what makes it worth it. But you can't just sit there on the beach forever. We know that.
Right.
It's miserable.
It's miserable. It's
boring. But everything's perfect. So what are you upset about? Because there's nothing hard.
Mm-hmm. Which it makes me think, what are the questions that you're fielding from Order of Man or whomever, right, on a regular turn that you're like, guys, I've answered this 1,000 times, but it's 1,001. I'm gonna answer 1,000. Like, what are men asking you? Like, what is it that there's kind of the complexities of those questions?
There's one, and it's not really. I guess it's I don't know. The one question I get all the time is, how do I build confidence? You've got to do something that you didn't think you could do.
Right.
Period. So, like, if you don't think you can run a marathon, then you have to run a marathon.
Right.
And when you're done with the marathon, you're going to be more confident. Mm-hmm. If you're not confident around women, you actually have to be around attractive women and ask them out.
Right.
Like, there's no other way around it. And then once you do that enough, you'll develop some level of confidence. It sucks because the answer is, like, do the work. Like, dude, you got to do it. But that's the answer. Like, some people just think that other people are confident. It's like, no, like, you could be arrogant.
Sure. But
that's not earned. Confidence is earned. Mm-hmm. So you have to go fight a battle. You have to do something hard. And when you do it and overcome it and like I said earlier, make yourself capable of dealing with that obstacle, that's how you develop confidence. But I have other people who ask questions about like life decisions. Like, I think we talked about this last night where, somebody will reach out and say, hey, I've got this job and, I'm away from my family all week and I come home and I spend 2 days with them. And, I don't like the work, but man, I'm making really good money.
Right.
But I got this job offer and I'm going to be at home and I never have to travel and it's like really rewarding work and there's an opportunity for growth and expansion with this cool new company, but I'm going to make a little less money. What do you think I should do? And I said this last night. I'm like, well, okay, are you going to be able to make the bills with your new job? Oh, yeah. No, we'll be fine. What's the question?
Right.
And I tell these guys, just fast forward 20 years. Fast forward 20 years. Look back. Looking back 20 years, which decision will you be happy you made? And it's always the spend time with your family, of course.
Yeah.
Pursue the meaningful opportunity that could present itself and make a few less bucks. But that's a question I get all the time. It's frustrating because they already know the answer, but they want somebody to validate they want one of two things. They want somebody to validate not doing it because that's easier. Like, it's always easier. When we moved to Maine, which was about 1.5 years ago from Utah, it would have been easier not to move to Maine.
Right.
Like, significantly easier not to do that. And yet we made that decision because we knew it would represent a good opportunity and adventure for us. Mm-hmm. So people are either, when they ask questions like that, they're either looking for, like, it's okay, you don't have to do that, and they can retreat mm-hmm. and slink back into the corner, or they're looking for permission. Like, you don't need my permission to tell you, like, you should take that other job.
Right.
Like, be a man, be assertive. This is your life. Mm-hmm. What are you asking me for? And by the way, I don't have to live with the consequences of your choices.
Right.
So if the advice that I give you is shit, you still have to live with it, not me. So make the decision. It's hard because that's, people want that validation.
Yeah, I get that same question. We were talking about it yesterday, twice a week, once a day. I don't even know, to be honest with you. The people DM and be like, oh, but I got this great opportunity. I'm like, well, what is the question?
Right.
Ultimately? And it's kind of like, I want to say, guys, like, you don't need to hire me as your Instagram direct message consultant and I can tell you what you already know.
Right.
Like, just do it.
Yeah.
And the fear, right? So I see that in a lot of people, mm-hmm. right? The fear of failure mm-hmm. or the fear of not being accepted socially or something like that because you're stepping outside of a norm. And I don't know, my question in that is, do you see fear as a obstacle for a big portion of the people and are you teaching people
how? We talk a lot about that. I mean, it's fear for the most part is misplaced. So I think what you have to do when you identify some sort of hesitation welling up inside of you, and there always mm-hmm. is, like whether you're going to start a business or, move to Maine or, whatever, you're always going to have something where you're hesitant. You're like, I don't know if this is right. So your mind cannot distinguish between it when it comes to fear. It cannot distinguish between something that's going to put you in an uncomfortable situation and something that's going to kill you. Mm-hmm. Like physiologically, you react the same way, which is to fight or flight, right? So I'm facing this decision. Let's just take the example of moving your family across the country. I'm faced with this decision, and physiologically, everything about me is telling me, like, this is dangerous. Don't do this. What about your income? And it's going to cost a lot of money. And then I had things like, what if somebody gets hurt? And they wouldn't have got hurt if you didn't move to Maine. Like, like all kinds of weird shit going on in my head about why we shouldn't do this. And it's my body's defense mechanism to keep me safe, to keep me alive.
Yeah.
It's what our ancestors dealt with 10,000 years ago. It's the same thing. And so what we need to do now, because we're not going to be chased by a saber-toothed tiger and have to deal with this, feast or famine. Like, you're not going to have to deal with that. So you have to ask yourself, when you have this level of hesitancy, is this going to make me uncomfortable or is this going to kill me?
Right.
Because if you're afraid, like, it could be warranted. If you're standing on the cliff, like the edge of a cliff, and your body says, hey, you probably should step away, that's probably a good time to listen and step away from the cliff.
Right.
But if it's like, hey, you're going to take this new job, but you're uncomfortable because there's a lot of uncertainty and doubt, that's not going to kill you.
Right.
It's just going to make you uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And we know that when you're uncomfortable and when you push through, you develop confidence like we talked about earlier, and you give yourself opportunities that would not have been present before. The other thing I do is play out worst case scenarios. So let's take Maine again. So, all right, so we get to Maine and we spend, I sold my business. I was already on a buyout option, but I just said, what, the guy that I was telling you about earlier, I actually sold it to him.
Okay.
So it was kind of nice because I had like a built-in buyer.
Yeah.
And he had a built-in buyer in me. It just didn't work out like that, right? Because I didn't want to stay in. So I sold. I called him up. I'm like, hey, I just want to do away with this. Like, he had payments that I said, nope, I want a lump sum. I'll discount it for you. Just pay it out or buy it out. He's like, done. So we did that. So that was a risk because I walked away from more money because I did it that way.
Yeah.
And then all my, my wife's third generation, born and raised, we bought the house that her grandfather had built. Her parents had a wedding reception there. Her brother had a wedding reception there. Her and I had our wedding reception there. We walked away. I mean, we still own the house, but we left that house.
Right.
We spent money on moving and everything else. So there was a lot of risk that went with it. And we got out there, and I remember for the first week, I was like, hon, I don't know if we did the right thing. I remember walking around the field like, I don't know. She's like, I don't know either. But then I played it out. I'm like, all right, well, what's the worst case scenario? So we're out some money, definitely. And we're cold for 2 years. And we don't have any friends for 2 years. Like, I'm just playing out worst case scenario. And then we move home. That doesn't sound so bad. Like, we can deal. What's the upside potential? Significantly greater than being cold and lonely for a few years. You know, we had each other still.
Right.
So we weigh it out. And you talked about it. You be realistic with what could potentially come from it. And is the fear really there? Is it going to kill you or just make you uncomfortable for a bit? Most of the time, you're just going to be uncomfortable. Cool. Deal with it.
Yeah. And that level of uncomfort, being excited about the level of uncomfort, because I talk to my wife a lot about this at times where I'm like, you have to force these opportunities to put the family into a team event. Like, and if we have the team, you know, the kids, your wife, whomever, and they're all working together in an uncomfortable situation, it starts to galvanize the relationship. Right?
Yeah, definitely. You have to turn inward.
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, seeking those opportunities becomes one of those things, for me at least. I have to kind of look at them and go, this will be an interesting exercise for the family. So oftentimes, like, I'll throw a wrench in things where I'm like, hey, let's just go here for a few days, you know, and they're like, what? We're just going to like load up the camper and head out. And we're like, yeah, we're going to figure it out, man. Don't worry about it. Like, we got enough food. We got enough water. Like that thing is solved. Everything else is going to become a problem that ultimately we're going to be able to solve together, and we're going to figure it out. It's not a big deal. Who cares? No, you know, our birthdays aren't going to fly away because of this whole thing. It might be a little bit cold.
Right.
You know, we might not have like the exact, you know, snack for the kids or something, but at the end of the day, we're going to get through this. It's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And so forcing those times and places becomes the things that you actually remember, and you start to laugh about them too. You're like, oh my gosh, you remember that time when we did that? Those are the things
like the best memories. You know, every time I've ever been miserable, whether it was like a scout camp when I was 10 years old, or, you know, taking my kids camping, like, and it rained and the water was under the tent. We didn't bring a tarp, so we got completely So we woke up and we had to like wring out our sleeping bags. Like, that's what we talk about. We don't talk about the last show that we watched on TV or the last movie we watched. That's the miserable stuff is what we talk about. And we talk about it fondly, which is nice that we as human beings have the ability to forget how miserable things actually are.
Yeah, and that's super weird too, because when I think back about my childhood, and it's never like, I remember watching Scooby-Doo, of course, right? But I don't remember the exact episodes or where I was or what I was. But I remember, you know, sinking to the bottom of my dad's sleeping bag up in the middle of the mountains to get warm, and, you know, trying to stay out of the rain in the tent, or, you know, the motorcycle quitting in the middle of nowhere, and, you know, having to hump around, you know, gas cans and helmets and stuff, trying to figure this stuff out. I remember that stuff. I remember that stuff. I don't remember any of the like other bullshit.
A couple of years ago, me and my son went on this hunt, and we were, he shot a pig. We could never recover it, which he was super disappointed because that would have been his first animal. Right. And then we went hog dogging. It was here in Texas.
What's hog dogging?
So you have these dogs, and you release these dogs on the pigs, bay them up, and stab them.
Right.
And so him and I did this, and we were running around all these pits with the guy, or these like bog swampy areas, and the 4-wheeler broke down. We were like 3 or 4 miles back from our cabin.
Right.
So I'm like, well, somebody coming out? And they're like, no, we got to walk back.
Right.
I'm like, okay. So me and my son walked back. He was 10 at the time. Walked back to the cabin. And then we're like, well, let's still go. Like, we still want to go. So we chased these dogs over everywhere. They were just all over the place. We had to trespass into this guy's property because the dogs were up there, and it was just a crate. And then we ended up finding a pig and killed it. It was just a crazy night. Like everything went wrong. We came back. One of his dogs died, had a heart attack and died. Like it was just it was miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And me and my son laugh about that trip all the time.
Right.
Remember? And like how fun that was. And we laugh about it and joke about it. That's like one of our best memories. And it was miserable.
Yeah.
But that's what you remember.
Yeah. And that's
because it was meaningful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun. And it becomes funnier the longer you get away from it.
Yeah.
So the next thing is, as you're looking through your priorities and what you want to do, what's kind of the next evolution
with the business?
Yeah. Both. Personal and business, both.
Yeah. Well, like personally, it's easy because it's just finding new things that I want to try that I've always been interested in.
Right.
And like for the first time in my life, I'm in the place where I have the capacity. I'm talking about time and the financial resources to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, that could mean a couple of years ago, we went to, my wife and I, speaking of just getting up and going, my wife and I and kids went to Hawaii for 3.5 weeks. And it's like, we just went. We stayed in this like bamboo house in the middle of a Hawaiian village.
That's
it was
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It was rad. It was one of our coolest trips. Or, I'm like, I was out at the lake last year and I was on a Lifetime, one of those plastic Lifetime canoes with the kids or kayaks. And I'm like, wouldn't this be cooler in a canoe that we built?
Right.
So I bought one and, a kit and like the books and all that. So we built it or we're building it. So personally it's that, like, if I have an interest in something, I've made a commitment to like, I at least owe myself and God, that's my belief, owe it to like pursue it to some degree.
Right.
So that's personally, and that could be 1,000 different things. I don't know what it'll be, but it'll be something. But professionally, like I'm really trying to figure out how I can get guys together locally in local areas, because that's what needs to happen.
Right.
Like we need to get, and that's what we're doing here this week, is we need to get together face to face. We need to do things. We need to have real conversations, not about sports or the Super Bowl or what. Like we need to have real conversations and figure out some of this stuff. We need to challenge each other. We need to push up against each other. And so developing some, I don't exactly know. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but within the organization, that's the next evolution, is how do we get guys banded together locally, connecting physically face to face and challenging themselves in meaningful ways. We've done a really good job of making it all digital. Now we're going to take it offline and make it available for people in their area. I've got a lot of ideas and thoughts about how I'm going to do that, and it's going to be big and it's going to be awesome, but it's going to take a lot of resources to be able to do it.
Well, I'm excited, man.
Me too.
I think I obviously, we've talked, I love your podcast.
Thanks,
so for those that we're kind of doing a dual show here, I guess we should tell people that we're doing a dual show. So you got to check out Ryan's podcast. Obviously, you can tell people where it's at. And, this is Free Range American. So, both.
Yep. So check out Free Range American. Depending on where if you're coming from Order Man, check out Free Range American. Check out Black Rifle Coffee. These guys are doing awesome things. I always joke, like, my favorite company, that I don't actually use their product because I don't drink coffee. So I always joke about that. But check out Free Range American, Black Rifle. And then for those of you who are coming from Free Range American, check out Order of Man.
Yeah, Order Man.
Yeah.
Ryan's doing check him out on Instagram. Listen to the podcast. He's got you wrote your book 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago, Sovereignty.
Yeah.
So hopefully a new book coming out soon, the next year or so.
Awesome.
Yeah,
well,
man.
Dude, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, bro. Oh, we got to do that?
No, we can do either one. We're sitting here without a mask, 3 feet away from each other. So awesome, man. Well, thanks a lot, you guys. We appreciate it. And tune in for the next one.